Most people think income problems start with bad habits. They don't. Income drops start with identity compression. After an emotional trigger, your nervous system doesn't feel safe expanding, so it quietly narrows what you're willing to reach for. You don't notice it as fear, you notice it as realism, caution, being sensible, and that's why it's so hard to catch. Most people don't notice when it starts. There's no dramatic moment, no panic, no obvious mistake. You just feel narrower. A little while ago, certain financial moves felt normal, obvious, within reach. Now they feel heavier, riskier, like they require more justification than before. You tell yourself you're being careful, responsible, realistic. But that shift didn't come from logic, it came from contraction. After an emotional trigger, your nervous system doesn't pause to assess whether you're actually in danger. It assumes restraint is safer than expansion, so it quietly reduces your operating range. You hesitate where you didn't used to, you second-guess decisions that once felt clean. You start needing reasons for things that previously needed none. And the most deceptive part is how reasonable it feels. You don't feel afraid, you feel prudent. You don't feel blocked, you feel discerning. That's why income slowdowns don't arrive as collapse, they arrive as restraint. And because restraint feels mature, you rarely question it. You just adapt to a smaller financial posture and call it wisdom, never realizing that what you're calling maturity is actually your nervous system bracing for a threat that already passed. This is where early conditioning quietly enters. Long before money was a goal, it was a signal. Early on, your system learned what happened when emotional charge entered the room. Not just anger or conflict, but tension, disappointment, unpredictability. In those moments, expansion wasn't neutral. It was noticed, questioned, sometimes corrected. So your nervous system learned an equation it still runs automatically. Emotional volatility equals risk, and risk means pull back. That lesson didn't stay emotional, it generalized. It taught you when to lower your voice, when to shrink your expectations, when to make yourself easier to manage. And money became one of the first things to contract, because money isn't just currency, it's reach, optionality, permission to move forward without asking. When an emotional trigger hits later in life, your system doesn't evaluate whether that context is still relevant. It reacts as if expansion will destabilize something important, so it doesn't shut you down completely. That would feel wrong. Instead, it nudges you towards restraint, towards caution, towards being smart about it. You delay, you reduce scope, you choose safer versions of the same move. And because those choices look responsible on the surface, you don't question them, you trust them. The same conditioning that once kept you emotionally aligned now quietly caps how far you're willing to extend financially. And because this pattern formed early, it doesn't feel imposed. It feels like your personality. Then the nervous system logic takes over completely. After an emotional trigger, your body shifts into a conservation mode that has nothing to do with strategy or intelligence. It's survival math. Expansion costs energy. Visibility costs energy. Risk costs energy. So your system narrows output to stabilize itself. That's why you don't feel panicked. You feel slowed. Your thoughts meet resistance. Your motivation doesn't disappear. It dulls. Financial ideas that once felt energizing now feel heavy, even irritating. Not because they're bad ideas, but because your nervous system has temporarily reclassified growth as a threat. This is loss aversion playing out below thought. Your system overweights what you could lose by moving forward and underweights what you could gain, even when your circumstances haven't changed at all. And here's the trick. This doesn't register as fear. It registers as discernment, as finally seeing the risks clearly. You tell yourself you're being more grounded now, but that clarity is artificial. It's coming from a narrowed threat lens. The world didn't suddenly become riskier. Your system just decided that now is not the moment to expand, so it quietly pulls the emergency brake on income, effort, and forward motion. You stop initiating. You wait for certainty. You look for reassurance that never fully arrives. And because the slowdown feels protective, you don't resist it. You cooperate with it. You call it timing. You call it patience, never noticing that what's actually happening is a temporary nervous system state quietly dictating your financial ceiling. This is where the slowdown stops being situational and starts being personal. Part of you still knows what you're capable of. You remember how decisive you felt before the contraction, how natural it was to move, to reach, to assume momentum. But another part of you is now arguing for restraint. That part frames itself as the adult in the room, the realist, the one who doesn't get ahead of themselves. And because that voice sounds responsible, it usually wins. You don't experience this as conflict. You experience it as alignment, like you're finally being sensible about money. But what's actually happening is an identity negotiation. One version of you is oriented towards expansion. The other is loyal to safety. And safety has history. It remembers times when emotional instability meant it was better not to want too much, not to reach too far, not to create more exposure. So after a trigger, that version steps forward and quietly takes the wheel.
You don't feel controlled. You feel reasonable. And that's what makes the contraction so effective. You start identifying with the smaller posture. You tell yourself this is just who you are right now, that this is the prudent version of you, without noticing that the identity making financial decisions in this state is not the same one that built your confidence in the first place. At this point, the pattern stops feeling mysterious and starts looking mechanical. Loss aversion is running the show, but not in the way people usually think. It's not about losing money, it's about losing stability. Present bias reinforces it. The immediate relief of staying contained feels safer than the delayed reward of pushing forward, so restraint wins by default. Guilt slips in quietly, not as shame, but as a moral signal that wanting more right now would be irresponsible. Neural pathways tighten around this sequence because it works. Trigger, contraction, relief. Each repetition strengthens the association, and then money dysmorphia distorts perception on top of it. When your identity contracts, your assessment of your financial reality contracts too. You underestimate your capacity. You misjudge timing. You see risk where there is mostly memory. None of this feels like sabotage. It feels like accuracy, like you're finally seeing things clearly. And then the loop escalates. The contraction doesn't just slow you down once, it resets your internal baseline. After a trigger, you don't return to your previous financial range. You stabilize at a lower one and start treating it as normal. You send fewer messages, you take longer to decide. You hesitate to initiate anything that would require explanation or visibility. And because nothing immediately breaks when you stay contained, your nervous system logs that as proof. Safer. The next time an emotional charge appears, the contraction arrives faster, with less resistance. Eventually, it doesn't even need a clear trigger. The system becomes anticipatory. You start limiting yourself in advance to prevent future instability. You gravitate toward income paths that feel familiar, controllable, and emotionally inexpensive. You avoid moves that would stretch your identity or force you to be seen differently, not because you can't handle them, but because your nervous system is optimizing for smoothness, not growth. Over time, this creates a ceiling that feels self-chosen. You tell yourself you're just being realistic about your capacity, your timing, your energy. You stop questioning why certain opportunities no longer feel like you. And that's how the pattern escalates invisibly. A temporary protective response hardens into a standing identity posture, a default operating mode. The nervous system learns that staying smaller prevents emotional volatility, and it keeps enforcing that rule long after the original trigger is gone. And here's the part that's hardest to notice. If income keeps dropping after emotional triggers, if restraint keeps presenting itself as wisdom, if staying contained keeps feeling like the responsible choice, then the problem isn't discipline or motivation. It's that your nervous system is still deciding how much you're allowed to have based on moments that already ended. Which means every time you tell yourself you're just being patient, just being careful, just waiting for the right moment, there's a chance the version of you making that call isn't optimizing for your future at all. It's protecting you from a past it still thinks is active. And until you can tell the difference between safety and suppression, your income won't feel blocked. It will feel correct.